Okay. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WIC TV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Gang, have we got a show for you today? Recently, in Britain, there has been a spat of riots, of violence, and other incidents that have kind of sparked off across the nation. There has been a lot of talk about why this has happened, what has led us to this point, and what we can do about it. And so I have gathered a team, okay? I have delved into the British Isles themselves and pulled off the best of the best to talk to you about this topic today. So thank you all for being here. Take a seat. I know for my American audience, some of the this may be foreign to you, but we'll try to explain as best we can what's going on and why. So I guess the first thing I'd like to do is pass the ball to. We'll start with Paula, ladies first. Tell us who
Okay.
you are, and give us your overall view on the situation, what's happening, etc. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm an evolutionary psychologist. I'm sexist isn't sexist on Twitter. I'm also a feminist critic, academic feminist critic, and a writer. I've written for the Post Millennial. Um, I'm pretty not based in anywhere politically, but just more kind of empirically based. I am working class though, so I do have a perspective on this. I did go and visit one of the towns where the outbreaks of violence first broke out. So I spoke to the locals there. So
Okay. Well, thanks for being here, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. Sohail Ahmed, please.
My name is Sahel. I'm a part-time physics student. I'm doing a combined bachelor's and master's in physics. I work in counter-extremism. I work in the counter-extremism space. So I go up and down the United Kingdom, speaking to students, other people, government ministers, civil servants, etc. And I speak to them about extremism, kind of trying to raise the kind of understanding and the awareness regarding the threat of Islamist extremism specifically. I work alongside actual victims of terrorism. I work alongside experts in terrorism, and we kind of work with former far right individuals, and we do panel discussions. So that's me.
Okay, well, I appreciate you being here, and I'm sure we'll get to know your takes as we go. Next up, someone who helped me put this panel together, introduced me to some of these guests. Mark, please introduce yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, hello, everybody. I'm Veteran Gamer UK from X, formerly Twitter. I'm a working class northern man in the UK. Currently reside in Doncaster, where there has been some protests. I was also present in Rotherham the other day when a hotel was being sort of targeted by what you can only describe as far right extremists. So, yeah, I've got a perspective on this, I believe.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and I'm hoping to hear it. Last but certainly not least, no stranger to my channel, Lonerbox. Tell people who you are, what you do.
Hey, I'm Box. I'm a YouTuber, and I like arguing with people on the internet. And I guess since other people are mentioning it, despite appearances and despite the snark, I'm also from a working class background in the UK. So, yeah.
Well, great. Well, I guess the first question is, what's going on there? What is actually happening? I see and hear all sorts of incidents and violence. There's images going off of people breaking into shops. There are reports of people setting hotels on fire. Paula, why is this happening?
well, there was a murder of three girls in Southport, which is in the west, is a seaside town on the west coast of England, and the the information coming out wasn't there was no information coming out about who had done it. So there was frustration about that, which is kind of there's a historical thing to that, because going back to kind of the Rotherham scandals and things like that, so people kind of have an inbuilt distrust of the media and of the police in that area. Now, there wasn't any violence immediately. There was a vigil held in Southport, and just after that, a man was arrested with a knife near the vigil, and photographs came out of that, and he appeared to be an Asian Muslim man, and that was the trigger for what we're seeing now.
Okay. So like when they talk about far right violence, is that
Mhm.
what this is about? Is this far right extremism? Is this what that looks like? Is that actually what is going on in the British Isles? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have no idea, because there isn't a big far right presence in the UK. The EDL hasn't existed for over 10 years. What I'm sure there are racists in the UK, and there are kind of men going around with who have English flags because of football, and there's a lot of testosterone involved. It's also the beginning of the school holidays. Now, when I went to Hartlepool, which is close to where I live, the locals were saying they didn't recognize any of the protesters. They saw them being coming in taxis from what they thought were Middlesbrough. What I saw on people had captured on their mobile phones were a lot of kids being given, like, just picking up stones. And it is the beginning of the school holidays now, so it just looked to me like kind of maybe like, well, what we call chavs, basically, in the UK. It's just kind of like just the kind of the rough, they're not working class, they're kind of underclass. They're better. And Hartlepool is a town that's been in decline for over 20 years now, and it does have a high population of asylum seekers. There was a rumor apparently going around online, again, nobody knows where this came from, that there were going to be another 10,000 asylum seekers put in the town. So there's nobody can say for sure who these people are. They just suddenly turn up. The locals don't know who they are. It could be, it's not beyond. They could be organized, fringe right-wing groups who are going to these places, or it could alternatively be, certainly now we're into the second week of this, even kind of the government sending people in to kind of just mess things up and get and rile up the Muslim population there. So that, and now we've got the Muslim Defense League mobilized, walking around towns shouting Allahu Akbar with swords. We've got councillors, like people in Parliament who have been local representatives, saying that the racists should have their throats cut. But there is, what I've seen mostly is a massive hundreds of thousands of people mobilizing online peacefully under the hashtag, this ironic hashtag, because Keir Starmer came out and called everyone who was protesting a far-right thug. So now there are hundreds of thousands of people. If you put this hashtag into X, you'll see multi-ethnic people ironically calling themselves, I'm a far-right thug, so called, and I want to ask questions about immigration. So there are much more people peacefully protesting online, but the media are totally concentrating on this minority. There's a couple of thousand of these people. Nobody knows who they are, but apparently the government does.
Okay, I wanna get more perspectives on this. I guess we'll go to Lonerbox. What do you think? Why is this happening? What's going on, etc.?
Almost everything in that retelling of what happened at the beginning is nonsense. People were not just skeptical of what the media said. We knew that the person who did the killing in Southport was a teenager, and it's not protocol for the police to release the name or any details about suspect who is a teenager. That's normal. The person who was caught with a knife at the vigil was a white guy. His name was Jordan Davies. He's been arrested since. The reason that people went towards
white in the photograph, which is what the trigger was.
You're making the point for me then. Yeah, that's what happens, is people blame Muslims when they have nothing to do with what happened. Because after that stabbing in Southport, people like Tommy Robinson and Andrew Tate, went straight to social media and started spreading this false claim that he was an asylum seeker, that he had come on a boat, that he was being investigated by MI6. We saw these tweets, we saw these posts. They had like 20 million views, these videos. Andrew Tate was speaking about how, like, if you don't use your If you don't pull the trigger then at the border, then you won't have a country. Tommy Robinson, I think, spent about 1 minute talking about how tragic it is to lose these 3 girls at this dance class, and then spends the rest of his 6-minute video talking about Muslims. Yeah, they were scapegoated. That's what happens. Yeah, all it took was one trigger of one unspecified person committing a stabbing. When you're talking about the people being far-right thugs, well, yeah, of course, when there's rioting, that's going to take more of the media's attention, especially this many riots and this much damage being done in the space of less than a week. Of course, that's going to take the media's attention because it's a disproportionate event. It's something that we're not used to seeing very often. As far as the response from people like Keir Starmer, it's not really any bit different from how he responded to the 2011 riots in London that was mostly done by left-wingers and ethnic minorities. He did the same thing with making sure that the courts were running around the clock. He's done the same thing with making sure that people are sentenced very quickly to kill the momentum of the riots. And that was when it was mostly left-wingers and minorities protesting. There's no double standard here. There's no two-tier system. And like you're kind of laying off yourself, it seems to be the case that Muslims bear the brunt of this even when they're not doing anything.
You can respond if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, like I said, there's almost a 20-year history to this, which what we call two-tier policing began in the grooming gangs in Rotherham and the northwest of England, where thousands of girls basically were groomed and raped and trafficked by what we found out were Pakistani Muslims. This is an independent report on this, right? It's all there, and it details the explicit cover-up because the authorities were afraid of inflaming racial or cultural sensitivities in the area, but which allowed these gangs to continue raping, trafficking, and grooming young, vulnerable girls on the streets. And we think this has got this. The scandal was then, and we think it was all over. But just this year in Newcastle, where I live, there was another grooming gang, and all of the information about the racial and cultural. It's more cultural. It's nothing to do with the color of your skin. There are so many multi-ethnic people who are actually want to know questions. My sister-in-law works in the NHS. She was walking to work in Sunderland and she was sexually assaulted by an asylum seeker. He was convicted but wasn't deported. We are now being called racists for wanting to ask questions about that.
Okay, so as far as the independent report on the Rotherham scandal, which was, I think, 10 years ago now, but if we're talking about the Rotherham scandal and the report...
It's still happening. Grooming's still happening.
Yeah, I know, because if you take any subset of any ethnic group in the world, yes, some of them will commit crimes. Some of them will commit horrible crimes. Yes, we know this. When it comes to the grooming gangs in Rotherham, talking about the independent report, I agree that report did say that at least some police officers, not all of them, some police officers said after they'd been caught fucking up, the authorities said that they were afraid of political correctness. That's why they didn't pursue things further. Yes, we know this. Okay. Just out of interest with the J report that mentioned that, can we also agree that that wasn't the only reason that the police had failed those victims in Rotherham? Do you know any other reasons they gave for in that report? Much more substantial reasons?
You inform me.
Why do you not know that, out of interest?
On me, like you say, it was 10 years ago.
It matters, though, doesn't it? Because that seems to be the go-to that people point at, even though when it came to policy recommendations and when it came to actually much more substantial reasons that story was under contention for so long. The other reasons they mentioned were, for example, victim blaming. Cops in Rotherham and South Yorkshire Police have had an issue that has gone back decades, even as far back as the 1960s, when it came to young working-class girls being abused, and that was before Muslims were there at all or had anything to do with it. Yeah, those cops, when it comes to working-class girls, are fucking dog shit when it comes to taking people seriously. There was also under-resourcing, the fact that there was no middleman between the police and victims, so that victims could either just go to a police station, not the nicest place to go if you're accusing people of crimes. There was no outreach, there was no youth groups, there were no women's groups, there was nothing like that to go to. There was also actually a failure of communication between the police and non-criminal aspects of the Muslim community, because the only people they were willing to speak to were local imams who either didn't know or didn't care what was happening. They didn't go to other Muslim groups in the community, and they didn't have any connections with them that might have actually shed light on what was happening. Would you also acknowledge, for example, that the J report said that the counselors, who their part in it was that they didn't want the story to become national press. Do you remember why they said that? The J Report said
No, I
why.
don't remember. You tell me.
Because they knew full well that if, first of all, out of thousands of people who commit grooming every year, not all of them get national press headlines. They were worried about this particular one getting national press headlines because of the response that would come from the EDL. And it turned out actually they were right. The EDL rioted. They caused like millions of pounds of damage in Rotherham. And one person was murdered. One innocent Muslim man, who no one seems to know about, by the way, Mushin Ahmed, was murdered outside of his front door by two guys accusing him of being a groomer. So I feel like this is what I mean when I talk about legitimate concerns. When people talk about these riots being born of legitimate concerns, the problem is that these are not.
Can I ask you a question?
One at a time. One at a time. We gotta let veteran go. Mark go. He hasn't had a chance.
It's
to
a
go,
simple question.
Yeah.
You made the claim that there's not a two-tier system, but then make the statement that the police treated working class people differently based on their prejudices.
Is that what people mean when they're saying two-tier system on Twitter? They're talking about working and upper class people?
Well, yeah, you think about it this way.
No, they're talking about Muslims and white people. Stop. When people say two-tier, they're talking about Muslims and white people.
Strictly true.
Let Mark go ahead.
Because you can describe this however you want to describe it and say it's a two-tier system based on race, but it's just not the complete picture whatsoever. There is a working class and the middle class in the UK. You can look at this two different ways. The working class see this very differently. A working class individual will look at the Rotherham scandal and look at other scandals like that, and they may read into it in detail, or they may not read into it in detail. But at the end of the day, they will see that there has been people, those girls who were subjects of abuse, were treated differently. Now, you can argue that's because of political correctness or failures of the state or institutions, or you can blame it on police attitudes towards working class girls. But no matter how much you argue against it, there is a two-tier attitude there. And we can argue that, is this the right attitude to take from the working class people? Should they see things that way? Maybe, maybe not. But ultimately, they will see it as something that's not being addressed. They will then look at commentary happening now in relation to these events, and they will see that they've been demonized. They will see Starmer's statement as being demonizing the working class. He's obviously having to make that statement because there are riots occurring. But if you're a working class person and you are looking at this over a long history over time, and we're talking whichever generation you are, the older generations probably see this more negatively because they've gone through the economic decline of the industries in their areas and the government not addressing that. And then that creates a vacuum where you've got young men who cannot work because there is no opportunities. And then you get far-right agitators who will move into that area and they will say, look, this is the reason why you can't find a job. It's people who look differently than you. And it's an easy message to sell to those people. And why is that message sold to those people? Because government failure. And we can argue about this all day long, but there is government failure at the core of this. Whether it's Rotherham or to this point, it's complete government failure.
Okay.
Yeah,
hold on. So Hyle, go ahead, please. He hasn't got a turn yet.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to deflate the kind of biases and clear kind of emotionality that's being expressed here. I think everyone's made a reasonable point and everyone's made a valid point. That includes Paula, that includes Lorna Box, that includes Veteran Gamer. Now, I do reject Paula's assertion that somehow the far right doesn't exist in the United Kingdom.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, that you were, forgive me if I'm misrepresenting, but you were kind of minimizing it and saying it doesn't really exist. There's not very many of them. I disagree with that assertion because when it comes to MI5's casework, there's evidence to suggest that actually a lot of their cases are more far right. This is the thing. You notice all the terror attacks that are being committed by Islamist extremists, right? Mm-hmm. This is the thing. The far right is more prevalent, but the intensity is lower. That's why you don't hear about much of this stuff. But when it comes to Islamist extremists, they're less prevalent. When they do stuff, they really do stuff. And that's the kind of difference you see in the media. And that's not the media's fault, it's just the nature of the whole thing. As for the grooming gang scandal, I would like to point out that the person who was in charge of the investigation and the prosecution against the grooming gangs was actually a Muslim man. And he went all out. He was blunt, he was brutally honest, And he pointed out to systemic endemic issues within the Muslim community. I, in fact, stated that actually the reason why this was so prevalent, and it was disproportionately prevalent amongst South Asian Pakistani men. I am Pakistani of origin myself, so I don't say that with any glee or happiness. But the reason why all of this happened was because there was this kind of perception that white girls are somehow, forgive me, sluts, slags, whatever you might want to call it. And they believed that they were easy target for that reason. It was based on prejudice. It was based on hatred. It was based on the idea that non-Muslims are somehow lesser, which is kind of a core issue within Islamist extremism, but more broadly within radical Islam. These issues are real. And we can't minimize, and we also can't over-exaggerate the severity of everything. We need to take into account the far right, the people rioting and protesting, right? Protesters, I would assume that some of them got kind of ensnared in it and they're not really far right. As for the people actually rioting, attempting to actually burn down a hotel with absolutely everyone inside because those people happen to be asylum seekers. Now, I'm quite strong on immigration myself. I think we need immigration control. But to do that, that's evidently and unequivocally and undeniably far right. And
I would say it was
as for-
psychopathic. I don't know. I can't look
It's-
into their heads and say that.
See, this is the thing. The people that engage in violence, in my experience, whether it be far left, Islamist, or far right, they tend to be the actual extremists. They really are extreme. And unfortunately, there's a subset of people within the far left, far right, and Islamist extremists who literally live for violence. And that's all they do. They love it. And that's why a lot of protests break out into violence.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I'm not an expert on the far right at all. So yeah, I'll absolutely take your word for that. But I am an expert actually on the misrepresentation of rape within institutional, British institutions, the police, certainly the media and the government. That's one of my specialities. What's your name? Loner Box?
So,
Is that how I?
oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh no, just Loner Box. Is that what I call you?
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that there were always these kinds of things about endemic kind of rape myths and victim blaming and all this. These are kind of tropes that come out in all government kind of things about rape. What would you say that the conviction rate for rape was in the UK now?
I think it's very low. I don't know the number though.
I think it's
No?
1%,
You wanna guess?
isn't it, or something?
What?
I would just say it's low. I don't know the
Is
number
it
though.
1%?
Is it 1%? Well, that's kind of that is the percentage that's put out in the media and in all of these
Right.
reports. Actually, it's over 60%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for my edification, why
Mhm.
is there a difference there? Like, because 1%
Because-
being the common thought versus 60% being the actuality. Can you connect these dots for my audience, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've written a very detailed article about this on my Substack called "Feminist Lies and Damn Statistics." Basically, feminists, and because feminists are much more represented in the corridors of power and in politics and in media, they take basically all claims of rape, and they count them all as as actual real, as going to court kind of statistics. The percentage of actual rapists that go to, and I've been through this process myself, my family's been through this process, and it was absolutely amazing. And when they go to court, the percentage of rapists that are convicted, at one point it was 74%. Right now it's about just over 60%. But feminists will misrepresent this to say that the institutions are institutionally sexist. They are patriarchal. The thing about feminism is its main aim is to dismantle patriarchy. It's not to help women. It's not women's rights, as we can see with the whole kind of trans rubbish going on. It's basically to dismantle patriarchy, and the criminal justice system is one of those institutions that it wants to dismantle. So, and the media are culpable in this. They constantly trot out these kind of ridiculous statistics. If any other crime was like kind of calculated in that way, the whole world would seem to be falling apart. No other crime is calculated in the way that feminists and feminist politicians and feminist media do with rape.
Can I
And
ask
that's how they gerrymander the statistics, basically.
Might I ask a question to clarify?
Go ahead.
When it comes to, so if I understood you correctly, are you referring to cases in which it's obvious to the court that the claim was false, and
these are cases
that's why they fell through?
No. These are cases. My statistics, the official statistics of cases that go to court. The main reason that cases don't go to court is because of the supposed victim withdrawing the claim. It's not because the police don't find enough evidence to support the claim. It's not because the CPS don't find enough evidence to support the claim. The CPS and the police want people to go to court because they want the message that over 60% of the time you will get justice. But feminists instead...
I think you understood. I think I was saying that what I was saying, in fact, was, are these cases that have, including that, but are these cases that have gone to court and the court's been like, wait a minute, you're lying?
No,
she's saying that the conviction rate is 60% plus, but that's if you only count people who actually make it to court. I think if you count everyone who makes a report, the conviction rate is like 2%.
Don't make it to court because, and this includes male rape as well, male on male rape, is because they themselves withdraw the claim.
Can I?
Is there any evidence that the majority of those are because of withdrawal?
Evidence.
So
has there been a survey done?
How do you fill that gap though with the withdrawal?
Yeah, this is it. This is if you look at all my statistics are in my Helen Dale wrote an abridged version of it on her Substack as well, because mine is 2,000 words longer or something. But Helen Dale, if you look that up, it's just basically the core statistics. So yeah, it's all of the, it's all publicly available information, government information, CPS information.
Just to draw us back a little on track, perhaps. Are you saying?
Well, it's interesting because although it's slightly off track, what she's talking about is disinformation, and what we are talking about here in relation to what's currently going on in the UK. Is that not completely fueled by disinformation? I mean, from the very beginning to now,
because it's not really disinformation. Because when people talk about a lack of conviction rate, they talk about like
I don't mean that. I'm talking about the
to the
UK.
police. Yeah.
I'm talking about the civil unrest at the moment. Talking about the riots.
I actually have sources who are directly involved in this, who are actually saying that there are entities formally investigating the involvement of Russian bots in stoking the fires when it comes to these riots.
Yeah,
now, of course, I think that there are some of the points that the kind of the rioters are making. I can understand where they're coming from. What is absolutely not justified is literally engaging in violence and kind of looting things.
Can I ask
Let's
you,
just
so
be clear
Hill,
that I kind of disavow that.
Sure. So Hill, when you say that they have some points, can you elaborate on that, please?
So I identify as Muslim. I used to be an Islamist extremist, in fact. I was raised as such by my family from the age of 6, and that's why I kind of stayed within the ideology. Unfortunately, I didn't leave the ideology very soon, not quickly enough, I think. I left it when I was 21, and I take full responsibility for that, so I'm not kind of shirking responsibility. At one point, I was even considering engaging in violence. So I always feel ashamed to say that. But I think it's important for people to know, because this is a threat that is real. We don't want to over-exaggerate it, and we shouldn't under-exaggerate it. And I kind of see both sides kind of under-exaggerating and over-exaggerating. Now, when it comes to these legitimate concerns, firstly, there's the prevalence of very extreme but also regressive ideas within the Muslim community generally, not even just amongst the extremists. For instance, a survey was done in the United Kingdom that surveyed British Muslims, And only 1% said that actually they believe in gay rights, as in it shouldn't be illegal. 99% said it should be illegal, not that they disagreed with it, but that it should be illegal. Now, there are other regressive ideas. For instance, the rejection of Britishness. And I don't say this in a really far right kind of way, like you have to be nationalistic, like hyper nationalistic. But there's a kind of view, trend within the kind of Islamic landscape. And this isn't by all means the majority. There's a significant trend within which British Muslims feel very much anger towards Britain due to Britain's colonial past, and therefore hate Britain, and as a consequence, don't integrate and don't even identify as British. And I think these kinds of concerns are very real. There's other concerns, for instance, the rate of immigration, the impact it's having, the effect it's having on cultural and national identity. And I again, I don't mean that in a far right sense. I really do believe that national identity is important to hold the social fabric of a nation together, especially a multicultural society. I'm okay with other cultures, but other cultures should be under the umbrella, the greater umbrella of British culture, as in other cultures should be aligned with British values and Western values. And I think a lot of these concerns are justified. It's just that when you go extreme and you engage in violence, that does make you far right. But there's a large swathe of people who have these concerns that are justified and valid. They're not hateful of non-whites. They don't hate Muslims. They just want to see change.
Okay.
I
Go ahead, Lonerbox.
I don't know how I feel about this kind of like impulse to think that just because like there's a riot or because there's unrest or anything like it, that the idea that there has to be a legitimate concern is always, excuse me. Shit, sorry.
Don't choke and die. That would be really bad for the
I'm okay. All right.
algorithm.
Sorry. I reject this idea that there always has to be like a legitimate concern whenever this kind of unrest comes up, because you can talk about legitimate issues. I don't deny that there are legitimate issues with like working class communities and deindustrialization and being politically abandoned and every like political party just going towards this mythical center that seems to exclude a lot of people from more difficult situations.
And the Muslim
But at the end of the
demographic.
But at the end of the day, when you talk about legitimate issues, like for example, I don't think anyone would say that the race riots in the 1950s were born out of legitimate concerns, right? That they were angry that black people were coming to the UK in fairly small numbers. I don't think the National Front were born of legitimate concerns. The race riots in the 80s, was that because we had too much immigration? No.
That's not
Cable
strictly
Street?
true.
Absolutely not.
True. Because
I
there's been two phases of mass immigration in the UK.
One at a time.
Sorry, I do
Go ahead,
apologise.
Mark. Then we'll go Paula. Then we'll go Sohail. And then
If you look at the history of immigration in the UK, there were two phases of mass immigration. There's one after the Second World War, getting towards the 1950s, where we went from very low numbers to mass immigration. That was then dealt with by the politicians at that time because they recognised it was too high and it was causing issues such as the riots that occurred then. Then the Blair government decided that when the EU was expanded to include Eastern European nations, that there would not be a massive influx of people based on a study produced by the University of Sussex, I believe, but I might be incorrect on that. They estimated that 13,000 people would come to the UK. Ended up being massively more than that, 600,000, I think, in that year, and it's just continued ever since. If you look at that and the previous riots, they follow on from mass immigration. And whether you could say, is that indicative of the attitude of the people in the country? But if you look at the UK, up until the 1950s, the UK, for its whole history, was an ethnic monoculture. And then in the 1950s, it's become a multicultural country. And it's the norms and the cultural values of the UK formed over that time. Now, I'm not making any claims about any other cultural values of any group, because we're all human beings and we all want the best for each other. That's the underlying factor. But there are differences. And if you do not integrate properly, or, if you've got mass immigration, and in the UK, we don't have great state capacity, you've got mass immigration, how do you expect people to integrate if you don't provide the resources for them to do so correctly? It was the same back then as it is the same now. People on the right claim all the time, well, why don't these people just learn to speak English? Well, to do that, you would have to have state capacity. You would have to have immigration figures. You'd have to employ people to teach people to speak English. That takes years. And is there any state capacity? What's happened in the UK in the last few years is because there's a lack of capacity. Is councils, because of austerity, which is a big important factor here, have been offered money to take sort of immigrants into those areas. They've done so because they need the money, but there's no integration other than they will then pay for a hotel. And then the people in that local area are like, because the local news doesn't exist anymore in those areas, so they can't report on this. And in that vacuum where there's no local news and no reporting, all it takes is a social media rumor that somebody of a certain skin color who looks a certain way from a certain country has done something in that area, and then the people will sort of this, the Chinese whispers will occur, and it'll spread via social media, be it Twitter, well, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, whatever platform it is, and all of a sudden people who, you know, are angry for valid reasons, and I'm not justifying what these far-right idiots are doing. And in relation to the hotel, I believe the maximum sentence for that is life. I'm quite happy for those people to be given life for that, because they can think about what they've done for that whole time. But at the end of the day, you've got all these structural issues where you've got no local media, you've got no support for immigrants, you've got no support for the people who live in that area, because we're talking about communities in the north-south divide where the industry's gone. It's in many of these areas. These people don't have social mobility, because if they're from an older generation, they used to work in industry, they do not have transferable skills. They can't move anywhere. Maybe they just want to stay there because they have a sense of local community. But, you know, you've got all this melting pot going on, and the government's just not addressing any of it. And even the EU is another factor, because the EU used to EU handled border control and all the sort of bureaucracy involved with that, because it was a EU-wide initiative. When the UK left the EU, that capacity went, and because of austerity, did they flesh it out? Not at all. So you've just got, it's a mess, honestly. I don't know what to say other than
sorry,
that.
I thought you were only going to cut me off for like 5 seconds, but that was like a whole.
Sorry, I apologize.
We went from like mass immigration to what, like a English speaking test, which if you want a visa in the UK, you have to go through. You have to have a level of English understanding. The people who can't speak English in the UK,
I think Samael would say that if you've got, depending on what culture it is, let's say you've got attitudes towards the education of women. And then that doesn't help with integration, because if you've got women that from a culture where they're not given access to education, they will move to the UK because there's a failure of integration. They may not learn to speak English. They're raising the children who might not be able to speak English, and causes issues for them.
Okay,
we got to give it back to Loner.
For a visa, you need to have at least a B1 like level of English, and if it's for people who typically don't need that, it's people who are like either healthcare workers or they're from countries where you would have a level of English anyway. The people who can't speak English in the UK will mostly be like a minority of asylum seekers.
Spouses.
But when I was talking about the Notting Hill race riots in the 50s, like these were just racist people attacking like black communities. Like what the legitimate concern here was that a 99% white country takes a group of like West Indian people who basically helped us in the Second World War, and also were filling shortages in the labor market that even Enoch Powell identified. No, I don't think that was necessarily born of a legitimate concern. If we're talking about
assuming that everybody who was raising issues, then
we gotta let Loner finish, and then other people need to go. We got a whole line. I promise. We'll get to you guys. Lots of time. Go ahead, Loner. Finish.
Yeah, if we're talking about the rioters, about the people who are actually doing these protests now, I don't know why it's always to assume that just because there are problems with immigration, and I'll admit there are problems with immigration, like you'd be mental not to, but that's just like to assume that the people rioting are sharing those same legitimate concerns. No, they're not. They're getting all their information from people like Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson and people like that.
That's not what I'm saying. Just to clarify, that's not what I'm saying.
I want to say that when I raised the issue of legitimate concerns that some people have, I was not in any way justifying the far-right riots.
No, I know you're not justifying the riots. I know you're not justifying the riots. I know you're not justifying the riots. But I'm just saying when it comes to attitudes towards immigration, like when we look at UK polling, we know that as far as the UK goes, some people, I think it seems to be like the majority opinion in the UK is that they want net migration to be reduced by like a bit. There's not really any like massive call for some like huge, like lowering to these whatever tens of thousands levels that the Conservatives used to promise or anything like that. So that's why when we talk about rioters, like I just feel like it's like there's something kind of like frustrating about allowing the conversation and the tone to get set by like this particular event.
We gotta get some more people.
I'm just going to explain my position. So essentially,
briefly, then we gotta go to Paula. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Briefly,
Oh,
then we
sorry,
got to go to
okay.
Paula. That's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
you're free.
initially, I my position was that, look, when it just started off, I was like, okay, maybe the government should acknowledge these concerns. As soon as it became violent, as soon as they started burning down hotels, I was like, fuck it. Do not give in to them one bit. If we are going to address immigration, if we are going to address these concerns, it should be because we want to, not because some thugs rioted. And I want them to go after every single one, regardless of race, and go after every single one, prosecute them, and I want to see them cry in court as they're handed their
Agree.
sentences.
I agree.
Paula, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I wouldn't disagree. The people who are upfront and being violent are, just the dregs of society. Nobody wants to see that. Again, I'll just remind everybody just to look up the hashtag. I'll remember it in a minute. But there is a massive, hundreds of thousands of people are peacefully protesting online. But we've now been told by the British government that we are liable for prosecution if we post unapproved media. We don't know what that unapproved media will be, but we are certainly on a watch list. Just to fact check loaner boxes kind of thing, Tommy Robertson did put a tweet out, but it wasn't about the murders in Southport. And yeah,
He
just
put out a
about
video.
why do you have to hark back to the 60s to talk about today? That
Because
shows
it was an
that
example
you're
of riots not being always born out of legitimate concerns.
We're talking about how many generations ago. We're not talking to anybody that's actually here.
Yeah, so I'm giving it as an example.
your
It's an
argument.
example. If I'm going to illustrate that, like,
It's
just
a very
because there's
weak
rioting doesn't
example.
necessarily mean. Well, sorry, but you were just wrong about what you said about Tommy Robinson. I spoke about a video that he put out. Do you want me to show you the video? Are you denying that he did that? Also, what you said about the Labour Party.
Sterling. Well, I'm just looking at the report here. There was a stabbing in Sterling. He was wrong about that being he said, an alleged Muslim. He was wrong about that.
No, he put out a video. There's a video. I can just send you the link in the chat.
Okay.
There's a video of him talking about the Southport stabbing, and in the first minute, he goes on immediately in this random tangent to just ramble about Muslims for 5 minutes. Like, that's not false, is it?
Whatever Tommy Robinson is, he was, and I'm not a fan of what's his name, the bald guy.
Tate.
Andrew Tate.
He's just using it to raise his status. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, it's just. But no, sorry, carry on.
Also, about the government saying that people are going to get in trouble for social media posts, are there any examples of people?
Yeah,
someone just got jailed for 12 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I'm going to. So my follow-up question is, what did they say on social media? Like, what law were they breaking?
I don't know.
There was some cases, so I reviewed this before I came on this stream.
They were inciting violence. Yes, that's
Yeah, because that seems to be the problem. Isn't that
quite horrific stuff?
Yeah, because I blame the press for this as well, because the press will say, and people on social media will say, oh, this person got arrested and jailed or charged for saying mean things or saying racial things on Facebook. But you look at every single story, it's like they're inciting. They're saying that people should go and attack this hotel or whatever. I think there was one exception with that 55-year-old. But
the context of people last year being visited by police for saying that men can't be women.
Visited by the police. Are these criminal charges?
No, non-hate crimes, they're called.
Yeah, they're called. So that's a problem, okay? And
it is, yes.
Yeah, and non-hate crimes are stupid, okay? But this is not what people are being charged for now. People are being charged for.
Oh no, I agree.
hatred,
but
right?
in relation to the 12 weeks, he made that comment in a family group. Okay. Now you can say he shouldn't have made that comment, and I agree that he shouldn't have made that comment. But I think there's a difference making that comment in a family group where people just might be saying.
Yeah, but can we just find the example, because I want to look through the details of it, because like I feel like every other example we get of this is they're actually doing something that would be criminal in just about any country.
Well, look, if you interpret it as they have interpreted it, it definitely is a criminal charge.
See, this is my position. If oh sorry, I can't.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. Sohail,
okay.
Please.
So this is my position. If you unwittingly retweet or share falsified kind of news or conspiracy theories, and it's unwitting on your part, I don't think you should be arrested or prosecuted. But if you fabricated those lies, prosecute them.
it's difficult to determine intent
because they're
though, isn't it, in those
inciting it.
situations.
British
In the
people.
courts have to like always give the benefit of the doubt to the defendant. That's how the court
We-
system works. So
Do we
I think
remember
that would.
the video footage of the girl with autism who was arrested for saying,
Lesbian nana.
yeah, that the policewoman reminded her of a lesbian nana, and the policewoman on the spot determined that that was a hate crime and arrested an autistic girl in the middle of a meltdown.
Wait, with this the
He
autistic
dragged her
girl
out.
who's wait, hang on. Where's the? Can we see that video again, or the story about it, the news story?
I don't have the link to that specific incident.
Because we're not.
On
This
hand,
isn't the girl who was just being searched during a pro-Palestine protest that
No,
everyone said
no,
came
this
from
was
this
in her
one.
home.
No,
She was arrested
Okay.
for, I don't know, hate crime, breach of the peace, something like that.
autistic girl.
She was dragged out of the home, if I remember.
Hate crime arrest, and this is a recent thing.
Yeah, hate crime arrest lesbian nana. Type that in.
Lesbian nana.
Sorry.
As weird as this.
it's a funny thing to
Crazy.
type
It was
into your
crazy.
Google. Okay. I as we're looking that up, I guess I have a few questions when it comes to what's going on and the incidents that are happening. To what extent is
Oh, I'm so sorry, Wick. This is an old story. This is from like February. This is like a police officer who got in trouble as well for doing what they did. But yeah, this is
Totally.
old. Yeah.
well, it's from February, right? That's not terribly old.
Well, it's
but-
not from the. But it's nothing to do with the riots.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
No.
No, but it's to do with the history of
Yeah,
Never
police are
mind.
bad sometimes. Yeah, everyone agrees. Yeah.
See, this is the thing. I think that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. This is
Oh,
the go
so
ahead
I think
gesture.
that
This is the
essentially,
stop
these
gesture.
accusations of two-tier. I wouldn't call it that. But what I will point out is that for too long, people, the reasonable individuals, the respectable society, has refused to comment and to discuss the issues with immigration, honestly. And because of that, that's created a vacuum. And people who otherwise wouldn't have become ensnared in the far right become ensnared in it, because the only people talking about it are the insane extremists on the extreme right. Furthermore, if people then actively suppress discussion of this by throwing unjustified accusations of racism or bigotry or Islamophobia, then people will just become extreme. You're just going to turn them far right. And I know people who are former far right. I work with them, and a lot of their stories kind of revolve around that. It doesn't justify it at all, ever, but we have to understand it in order to combat it.
Yeah, the explanations, not excuses.
So I know Keir Starmer in his manifesto pledge and even coming up to it did say that he wanted to lower migration, like legal migration. And his plan for the boats was not the Rwanda shit, because that's unworkable, but it was to target smugglers, which would reduce the number of small boat crossings. Like, I don't know. So what legitimate concern about migration is being like just completely ignored by the government, according to you guys?
Well, can I just ask, so you think that it's a myth? That there are no legitimate concerns?
Oh no, I think they exist. I just don't think we're hearing them from the same people who are making any kind of apologies for like what's happening or talking about two-tier policing or anything like
Nobody
that.
here is
Yeah.
making any apology for that.
Well, you're talking about like the people who are complaining about two-tier policing as well. Like, yeah, I think you tend to not hear them very often. Yeah, but I'm sure that they exist.
This is what the legitimate concerns I would raise, and these are actually my concerns too. So the rate of immigration, right, is unsustainable in that it's very difficult to integrate immigrants if there's so many immigrants coming in. You can't spend that much resources on it. You can't spend money on integration programs and have them be effective if there's so many. Furthermore, there's kind of concerns regarding security threats and extremism and kind of divergent values and views. And I think the solution to that would be something that's race blind. Right? This would apply equally to countries like my country of origin, Pakistan, and Russia, and some countries in Eastern Europe. If they're homophobic, or if they hold kind of values that are counter to ours, if they're anti-democratic, anti-human rights, anti-women's rights, I think that we should therefore then be careful about the country that we get these immigrants from.
How would that
And
look when just to question that? How would that look when it comes to like when the rubber hits the road? Like, would you limit the amount of immigrants coming from those countries per year, or how would that
be so
implemented.
be so stringent as to ensure that most of them don't pass. And I'm not saying that because I don't want them to pass, but because we have to be stringent, and it should be provable that they don't hold those views. If it's not provable, unless in very exceptional circumstances, I would kind of not allow them in. And I say that as someone who's brown. I say that as someone who's from a Pakistani origin background. I don't think this is about race. Those who do make it about race are literal racists and bigots and far right. I detest them. But this is about values and about the culture and about the social cohesion of our country and the safety of our country. And unfortunately, when it comes to de-radicalization programs, I shouldn't say that was underprivileged. So I won't say that, make that point.
I think the problem you run into there is that for citizens who come into or people who want to come in through visas to the UK, which is like the overwhelming majority of migrants, is that they do still go through.
Well, I'm particularly not really bothered about legal immigration. I'm more bothered about the undocumented and the people, because this is what the people of Hartlepool were worried about, that they were going to get.
So that's like, just to be clear, that's like less than 10% of the people who come to the UK every year, right?
Well, it doesn't matter.
Actually, we don't know.
Hold on, let Paula go. Paula, please.
Okay.
But that's why I'm saying when we talk about
Paula,
migration,
please.
like net migration.
Yeah, I want to give. I want Paula to finish her point.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm trying to figure out what
I thought
she's
you were
saying.
interrupting me.
No, go ahead.
10% is a huge number of people, especially when they're put in towns that have been, as you were saying, under austerity and are declining working class towns that have no jobs, that have boarded up shops, that just have no opportunities for the people who live there, and then thousands of people are put in and they're not integrating with the communities. They can't, it's just a tinder box. It really is. It's ridiculous.
So just to clarify, I'm not accusing of it, I'm just asking. So if net migration last year was like nearly 700,000, the number of asylum seekers coming in was 80,000. Like the problem is the 80,000, right? Like that's the ones you have an issue with, the undocumented ones.
Is that you saying the 80,000 undocumented immigrants?
Asylum seekers. But you
which
were
would be a form of
undocumented,
undocumented, yeah.
80,000 people.
We had 80,000 asylum seeker claims last year.
Okay,
right,
just so I can clarify, you guys are talking past each other. Just real quick, I think that he's asking you whether or not you have a problem with the 80,000 asylum seekers, whether they count as undocumented to you.
No.
So who are the undocumented migrants? Where are they?
Legal migration.
Legal.
How can you migrate legally if you're?
Means.
So small boats would be asylum seekers.
Not just small boats, but through smuggling in kind of vans in other kind of modes of transport.
Yeah.
So people who are smuggled in would come here to claim asylum.
Trafficking problem that isn't being addressed on these boats.
So people who come in here who are trafficked or come in on boats, they would either be asylum seekers, they would claim asylum, or they would get deported. So I'm just wondering.
No, that's not strictly true.
Actually,
I mean, the issue
we deport
is
like tens of thousands of people a year, but yeah, we do. Yeah.
We're an island, so we're not as bad as the US.
It is the problem, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but
the issue is state capacity. I mean, to do what?
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out which migrants you guys are talking about now. I'm confused.
Literally, it really is on its knees.
Right, so I just want to make sure I know which migrants you guys are talking about then. So we're not talking about the legal ones, the 600,000 like net migration. Those ones, okay. No. We're talking about the undocumented ones who are coming on boats, but not the asylum seekers. What?
Oh, for God's sake, stop being an idiot.
Why am I being, okay, tell me which category you're talking to.
I've said specifically what they are.
Undocumented, but not asylum seekers.
So personally, I'm referring to all of them.
Well, hold
on, because I think we have three different definitions going on, and we're all kind of talking about.
That's ridiculous semantics.
Fair enough.
It's not semantics. It just I have a feeling you don't actually understand the immigration system the way you're talking about it.
Okay, you can feel what you want.
So
people have issue with illegal migration. That's it.
Sohail, However, at least
Wait,
from
Unless
what,
they're racist.
hold on, just
And
real
then they have
quick.
issue with
Just
all migration.
let me finish my point, okay? So Sohail, as I understand it, and Sohail can correct me if I'm wrong, wants even legal immigration reduced from certain countries, right? And he named
Yes.
some Eastern European countries, Russia,
Russia,
Pakistan, and a few others. So that's his issue, right?
That's not what I'm speaking to. He's the expert on that.
But Paula
Okay,
is.
I'm speaking from what I'm hearing on the street.
Yeah, Paula has a different problem, right? So let's address these.
I'm just saying what I hear on the street.
Sure.
Now, these are people who look at the stats.
Okay, so.
But their opinions, you're saying, are.
When you say illegal migrants, we're talking about. So up to March 2024, there were about 40,000 people, just under, who were irregular arrivals. Almost all of them, 4/5 of them came by small boats. These are the people we have an issue with, right?
No, I don't have an issue with them. The people who think they're going to get dumped in their declining communities do.
Yeah, so what you're referring to in hotels and things like that, right?
I don't know. There are no hostels for asylum seekers in Hartlepool. They're all actually. You were mentioning somebody was murdered. Have you heard of a man called Terence Carney?
No.
No. In Hartlepool, he was murdered by. I'm just reading this. This is just this year. Okay, so we're thinking about what might have, inspired some people to kind of just get a bit pissed off. Moroccan asylum seeker Ahmed Alid stabbed 70-year-old Terence Carney multiple times. He was housed in a because there are no hostels in Hartlepool for all of these people that are going there. He was housed with a genuine asylum seeker who had escaped from Iran because he became a Christian. He also stabbed him. And when he didn't kill him, he waited till he was asleep and stabbed him, thought he'd killed him, then went out into the street and attacked the first person he saw, which was 70-year-old Terence Carney, and he killed him. This was logged as a hate crime, a hate crime in Hartlepool. Now, people in Hartlepool were obviously really pissed off about this, and the Guardian logged it as an isolated incident.
Was it not an isolated incident?
But they didn't mention it was a hate crime. If it was a white person doing that to an immigrant, it would have been front page news. This is what we're talking about: two-tier, policing, two-tier media, two-tier
policing. Because so in the Guardian article they say man jailed for life after Gaza quote revenge murder, because that's what he claimed his motive was. They mentioned that he said Allahu Akbar. They mentioned that he claimed to be taking revenge. What? Because they didn't mention the word hate crime. That's like this article is in the Guardian. They've written like 1,000 pages words to
the
it.
media now change the text of their things now.
So
I'm just going from what I see.
This person who came in,
because local working class people don't use Twitter; they use Facebook, and they use.
The Guardian actually described it as terrorism, just so you know. So I don't know what the two-tier is here. Right, okay.
Yeah, Paula, finish your point, please. Go ahead.
No, it's just, again, you're dismissing it. You a few minutes ago, you were saying, oh, a person in Rotherham, and as if it was it is a terrible tragedy, but you're not prepared to say this was a terrible tragedy as well.
I'm sorry, do you think I wouldn't say this murder was a terrible tragedy?
Well, you didn't. You just immediately went to coping and explaining away.
It's not explaining. What am I explaining away? What did I explain away about it?
Well,
that's not an answer, because I didn't explain anything away. Okay, that's fine. So what I said was that the Guardian, you said that they were like they two-tier reported this, even though they described it as you said they two-tier reported it, even though they described it as terrorism. How is that two-tier reporting? They called him a terrorist.
We know the media changed the stories after their immediate.
Okay. Can I ask a question, if anyone doesn't mind? Can I ask
a question? Go
ahead,
Mark, please.
If there's a lack of state capacity and you have asylum seekers coming from war zones or areas where they've been subjected to trauma, and this is just probably an example of that, and they're not being supported because, let's face it, in the UK, there isn't even mental health provision for anybody, let alone for people coming from areas where they're going to need extra help to integrate simply because they've faced such great trauma. And to sort of add on to what someone else said before, he's talking about we need a system for sorting people. We don't even have the capacity to sort economic migrants from asylum seekers. So to even get to the point that he's describing, you would need to start addressing that. And we don't even have the capacity to do that. So is it any surprise that when a cash-strapped council who's getting paid to take asylum seekers on a per-person basis houses them in a hotel because they need the money, there's no mental health provisions for those people. There's no local reporting. So rumors spread right through Facebook. This guy did this. But then when you actually look into the story, I mean, Gaza was mentioned there. But, we've all got opinions on Gaza, whether that situation in Israel, because it's a big talking point. But at the end of the day, imagine being a person living in that place, living in that environment where you're being subjected to ideology 24/7. You probably know people who've been subjected to trauma. You're subjected to trauma constantly throughout your whole time while you're there. And then you go to another country and there's just no support whatsoever. You get put in a community that you don't, in a hotel in a community, and you're cooped up in a hotel as well. Now, you could argue that, well, people, they're being paid to be put in a hotel. But at the end of the day, you've got someone who's suffered trauma, who's now just cooped up in a hotel, probably doesn't speak the language, is not in a deprived area, can't integrate because they have to stay in the hotel till their claims processed. It's a small room. A person's in a small room, isolated, thousands of miles from where they were born, and they're suffering from trauma, but there's no support for those people whatsoever. So is the issue what that asylum seeker did, or is the issue that there's no support for that person? That the UK government's solution, because they lack the capacity to do anything, is just to pay a council, because of austerity, that council needs the money to take people, and they just get put in a hotel, and there's no resources to support those people whatsoever.
Well, the CPS
That's
said
the issue.
mental issues were not part of the the issue.
Well, I would suspect if you're from Gaza, you're going to have some kind of trauma. I would suspect.
I don't know if he was from Gaza. He said
I don't think he
was
was.
he was committing the crimes in revenge for the children of Gaza.
He was Moroccan. He had nothing to do with Gaza. Yeah, he just.
I misunderstood. I apologize. My example stands either way. People who are not receiving support.
Yeah, so I agree with just about everything you.
There's an X account called Peace.com Center, which is a voice for anti-Hamas Palestinians. Now, these are part of the most oppressed people you could ever meet. There is no free speech in Gaza, but this one X account gives them a voice. Peace.com Center on X.
Okay,
just look that up.
Sure.
So just coming back to the asylum seekers claim.
No, all good. And I can put the link in chat and at another point. But I do have a question, I guess. Well, Loner, you wanted to say something, but then I do have a question to kind of maybe drive us along. Go ahead, Loner.
Yeah, I wanted to address the thing about asylum seekers. So yeah, we do know right now that there's a massive backlog, and the processing has been really far behind on asylum seekers coming to the UK. We know that is in large part because the Conservatives wasted a shitload of money, like hundreds of millions of pounds, with the Rwanda scheme and with Stop the Boats, neither of which actually worked. So, I mean, it seems to me personally, if we're talking about solutions and the legitimate issues and everything, I think what the solution with asylum seekers is getting enough resources together to actually process the people who are here, and then focusing on targeting. Why, I don't know why you keep talking over me, but and then the other issue would be focusing on for like 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Anyway, so one solution would be potentially making sure we can actually process the people who are already here because they need to be processed, but also targeting smugglers, because it seems to be that Stop the Boats and Rwanda were a total failure. But I don't know, does anyone have an issue with either of those solutions? Or
Well, but the whole boat thing is an issue about modern slavery and human trafficking. So absolutely it should stop. Absolutely it should be addressed.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disagrees with you, Loner, right?
Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, no, I think she's agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna get your opinion, Loner, because Sohail, I think, has made the most forgive me for using this word, extreme proposition here about very limiting countries, right? Given this,
I agree with him on that, by the way.
Yeah,
just
sure.
so you know.
But given
I do too, but I think it's a problem we need to address.
Just to
as a country.
clarify, we shouldn't ban. We shouldn't ban.
No,
We should just be extra careful and apply more security measures.
Understood. However, it would severely limit the amount that are coming in, reducing it greatly from what it is now to what you would like it to be. So I guess to question you, Loner, on this, do you find that an equitable solution? When we talk about, and you mentioned that you had problems with the immigration system as it is now, and you think there are reasonable and rational problems. Can you give us an example of something you think the immigration system is doing that is failing Britain from your perspective? Go ahead, Loner.
So I already mentioned the thing with the asylum seekers, which I think is actually the biggest problem that we haven't addressed because it has the easiest solutions as well. For the legal migration, I think everyone would agree that probably like almost 750,000 net migration in 1 year is too much compared to even what we usually have. So as far as security measures, the problem is I don't really know how far that can go because it seems to be that we already do have like pretty stringent measures for testing people on whether or not they like are willing to uphold British values and all that when they come here. It seems to be the problem with migration is not necessarily first generation migrants, but second generation. And I don't really know how you nationality test for second generation immigrants because that seems to be where a lot of the crime and even a lot of the terror attacks comes from. And it comes from, there's a very complex sociological reason for that. So I think the problem is more to do with dealing with second generation migrants who are actually born here rather than entries. But yeah.
I think it's both. There is quite a bit of evidence to suggest that actually a lot of the and it's not just asylum seekers, it's kind of immigration generally, but it includes asylum seekers, that a lot of them are getting referrals to the de-radicalization, the prevent program. And you make absolutely salient points regarding the second generation immigrants. But I think that when it comes to that's kind of very related, but somewhat of a separate issue slightly, in that we need to deal with that in another way through de-radicalization programs, prevent programs, or other means, right? Within reason, nothing extreme. As for the immigration thing and my views on the immigration issue, I think that it's about ideas. It's about culture. Culture is correlated with geography. Geography is unfortunately correlated with people's ethnicity. Therefore, if you kind of try to control the values of not control them, but control the people coming based on values, you will undeniably then have a differential effect on geography and then ethnicity. That's really, I hate that. I really feel uncomfortable with that. But it's kind of the fact, unfortunately. As for the point that Veteran Gamer made, I think I agreed with most of what he said, but I think that we may be kind of dismissing or underestimating the role of ideology and religious ideology in all of this.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So let me, it's because being a former extremist, I know how that is involved. Let me just define kind of Islamism. Islamism is about kind of 4 concepts, right? It's about believing in the Ummah, which is like the Muslim polity. It's like the equivalent of Christendom, believing that Muslims are essentially kind of a figurative state. From that, and within that comes al-wala wal-bara, which is in Arabic, that means love and hatred, right? That means only loyalty towards Muslims, but hatred towards non-Muslims. So it's kind of like a binary exclusionary thing, this in-group, out-group thing. And by the way, I'm just referring to Islamist extremists, not all Muslims, and certainly not the majority. The second thing that then leads to is the Khilafah or the Caliphate. They believe that there should be an Islamic state, essentially an Islamic empire that takes over all the Islamic countries, and then it's defended and expanded through violent jihad. And I literally mean through both defensive and offensive jihad, offensive war, that then annexes other territories, including non-Muslim territories. And from that comes the idea of, the other idea is essentially Okay, let me think about this. I'll come back.
It's okay. Just a question on that though. Do you think that this is currently
Oh,
part
I
of or
remembered.
contributing to the problem that we are facing with the British riots and these things? Can you tie these together?
Yes, I think that is quite considerably, unfortunately. Let me just make it clear. The people really responsible for these riots specifically are the people that spread those conspiracy theories, that claimed
Great.
that it was a Muslim kid, that claimed that there was a Muslim man who went to the vigil with a knife, that claimed also on the other side that an acid attack had happened on a Muslim woman. But at the same time, this comes
that was the
with
left,
a
yeah.
background.
That was
Sorry.
the left. That was
That
the
was the
left.
left, yeah.
interpretation.
And unfortunately my community. That all happens under this background, right? Or over this background. And essentially, so it was what I mentioned before was Ummah, Khilafa. The next thing is Sharia, in which that's how the Islamic State should be ruled, through literalist narrow Sharia that is anti-human rights. So not Sharia in general, but a form of Sharia that is very narrow and very kind of regressive. Then the last thing is essentially jihad. So that's kind of through violent means expanding and defending this territory. That's what makes Islamism. That's what makes extremism. Now, I'm going to quote Tony Blair. Tony Blair was mentioned before. Tony Blair is the only Western politician. He's not the prime minister anymore, but he is very much involved in politics still. He's the only person with influence who has ever stated the following: that Islamism is a mainstream trend within Islam. He clarified later, saying he doesn't say it's the majority, but it's a mainstream trend, one of the main trends. It's that it's a very significant minority. And unfortunately, my experiences and from talking to others, that's true.
Would that be kind of like Islam, the non-separation of church and state, and
Yeah. So essentially, they want
is
to
that it's actually a
create
colonialist ideology?
Yes, it's imperialist. It's Islamic
Yeah.
imperialism. Yet they complain about Western imperialism, which is very ironic. And that's one of the reasons I left and became de-radicalized, because I realized that hypocrisy.
So why
Okay. But
do you think those ideas take hold with second-generation immigrants in this country?
That's a very good question. My view is that essentially they've come into a country, they're born, and they're kind of straddling between two places. Are they British? Are they Muslim? Are they their ethnicity? And essentially, because I think that when it comes to this country as opposed to America, we are somewhat ashamed to be British in a sense. We kind of have a lot of white guilt regarding, and I say we, but we do. It's regarding kind of colonial history, which is absolutely understandable, very understandable. But I think it gets to a degree where we kind of almost start feeling ashamed. If anyone flies a flag, they assume that they're an ethno-nationalist or a racist or far right. And I think all of us in the UK kind of realize what that means, what I'm referring to. But because there's no strong unifying identity that's based on, say, the country or the culture, they go for whatever else provides that. And the extremists provide that community. The extremists provide that identity. The extremists provide that culture. We
It's
failed.
the failure of multiculturalism, isn't it, really? In the current form, anyway. I mean, I would also add this. Do you think that possibly, I mean, I'm not going to draw an exact parallel, but if you have young men, and let's face it, people who are rioting, who are becoming extremists, tend to be young men. We can argue about the reasons why they do this, but I would argue that economic disadvantage, lack of access to what society can provide, creates a space for extremists to exploit those young men, because it fills that void with their ideas, because there is a void there. And if I may draw a parallel, it's the same with the white far right. You've got disadvantaged young white men in an area where there's no economic opportunity. Because the government is not addressing the deindustrialization that occurred, the far right comes in and fills their heads with similar ideas about people who look like you. So you've got two groups. You've got Islamic extremists and the far right, who are basically using the same psychological tools to target disadvantaged young men to turn them against each other. And then we have civil unrest, which is exactly what's happening now. And this is fed by disinformation, because it takes it for someone to go online, and we've referenced that the left have done it, the right have done it, but everybody's doing it. I mean, which is why the
Russian
likes of
bots have
Andrew.
done it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if Russia's doing it, then it's got to be an effective tool, isn't it? At the end of the day, because they're trying to undermine the West as a whole. So
Just to kind of maybe bring this back around just a little. And Paula, I know you want to go, so I'll let you go real quick. But then I have a question for Lonerbox. So Paula, and then I'm going to
Yeah,
ask
I
Lonerbox the
just
question.
because one of my academic specialities is looking at kind of feminist theory in a kind of academic, empirical, critical sense, critical thinking, not critical theory sense. The thing that's kind of, I think, Solhill, you mentioned that you approach things from a kind of a colorblind kind of perspective, which makes sense, from an Islamic kind of thing, because Islamic, as you said, is a kind of colonialist, imperialist kind of thing, and it brings people in from all kinds of
Islamists,
races.
rather, the extremists. Not Islamic, but
But
Islamist.
what we're missing, I think, is the big thing that's kind of bringing all this thing together, which is the non-colorblind ideology, which is lots of men have now grievances, the same way that, like, feminists would say women have grievances. So they have these grievances, and they're all adopting this intersectionality perspective, which our government, specifically the Starmer government, the leftists, are adopting. So they're now so they are empowered to express their grievances in that way.
Might I respond to that, or
Go ahead. Yes.
because it was addressed to me? I absolutely agree with you when it comes to that. I would describe that as far left. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. This isn't exactly far left, what I'm about to describe, but recently what happened is that there was a British Muslim woman, I believe an MP, who was robustly criticized on TV by a panelist of white people. Everyone started screaming, "How dare you? This is disgusting. This is colonial. This is racist. How dare you treat us with kids' gloves?" Essentially, the kind of implication behind that is that somehow we're a bit savage, and that essentially we can't deal with robust criticism like everyone else can. If anyone treated me that way and went kind of soft on me and kind of assumed, well, you know what, he's Muslim, I expect him to hold some backwards views, I'd be furious.
Yeah. So I think feminism, mainstream feminism, and most men and women aren't feminists. I've researched this, but feminists are vastly overrepresented in the corridors of power, and intersectionality, this kind of like this whole identity politics thing, is ripping communities apart, ripping countries apart.
Okay.
British white working class can see it.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, they can, but they don't see it in relation to people who look like yourself, because they confuse Islamists with Muslims who are not Islamists.
I want to,
and that's identity being weaponized, isn't it? But they don't actually understand the differences between the two.
Yeah, I want to give Lonerbox a chance to weigh in as well. He's kind of like the odd man out here. But I also have a question for him as well. So we'll combine the two. I'm going to let you respond to all that. But we talked a lot about the causes, I think, today, of the riots, why they're occurring, why they're getting worse, etc. I guess the question for you, Lonerbox, and I want to hear from everyone, but Lonerbox first on this. How do we stop this? How do we cool these temperatures down, and how do we kind of prevent such flare-ups from occurring again and continuing to occur in Britain as you guys go forward? So you can respond to anything they've said and address that question, and then we'll go from there. Cool.
Okay, I think as far as how do you stop this, at a very immediate level, I think the response from Keir Starmer and the police has made sense. It's basically the same way that they dealt with 2011, exactly the same, actually. As far as setting an example very quickly, arresting people quickly, and making sure that the courts are running fast, so that people basically know that, well, I rioted yesterday and the guy I rioted with is in jail for like 12 months, so maybe I'll just not turn up tomorrow. It worked in 2011, it'll probably work this time. As for tackling like broader opinions, I don't know. I think it's, as far as like on the Islamic side, I think I agree with a lot of what you were saying earlier, but I think one thing that's maybe missing is that one thing that gets observed quite a lot about second generation Muslims who get radicalized is that I think you touched on it a little bit, is that what they seem to get stuck in is that they don't really identify with the British society that they're born into, but they also don't identify with the traditional conservative Islam of the old country that's given to them by their parents. They don't really like that either. And that's why you get this issue where like Muslim radicalism in the UK, and especially people who go abroad afterwards from Europe, is that it's got a lot of modern aspects. Like they listen to things like jihadi rap, which is not really traditional Islamic values, or you get people who go to join ISIS and then they turn up and they find out that a bunch of the other Europeans who went there don't even know how to pray properly. So I think it is reasonable to treat that as our problem as well, like because of the way that a lot of these people get radicalized is not too different from how far right people get radicalized as well, in terms of emasculation and humiliation and lack of a kind of like broad narrative that makes them feel strong and relevant and like they're in control of something or claiming something. So I think that matters, but again, that's a problem that seems to come mostly from second generation migrants. So I don't really know if reducing the numbers overall is going to deal with that. That's like a domestic issue as well. As far as what come up about color blindness and a lack of, or people talking about intersectionality, I don't know what that has to do with rioting in particular, and with the far right thing happening right now, because I don't know. I think it's maybe a little bit telling that we started talking about a lack of race blindness and all that for intersectional people, and not for the protesters and the rioters, because I feel like at the end of the day with the UK, even when we've had very low immigration, even like Cable Street, right? Sometimes you get people who are just angry and racist. I don't know how you deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to the far right people, if you're literally going around trying to lynch brown people, right? You're fucking far right. You're a racist. You're a bigot. And whilst I might describe the background of this, in why I'm describing it and why I'm explaining it is because this has allowed the far right to grow, because the far right exploit this, and they kind of like rally around and they gain numbers. And that's why. But when it comes to these specific riots, I think that whilst there is a connection, I think that's more about conspiracy theories and more about kind of people that are violent just wanting to be violent, and people that are racist being racist. I don't think I made that point previously, but that's my position on it. As for the point that this is how I would describe Islam. There's Islam. Within that is a subset of traditionalist Islam. Within that is a subset of radical Islam. Within that radical Islam is Islamism. And within Islamism is jihadism, right? So necessarily, if you're an Islamist, you're going to be a traditionalist. Now, you made a salient point, though. You did make a good point, in that when you said that they're not particularly religious, I've noticed that the Islamists tend to be not as observant.
I think also it does just help to be a little bit like more accurate on the facts. And I think you can blame liberals for this, for not setting the record straight all the time. Because if we're talking about even Islam in the UK, well, if we're looking at like different forms of crimes or anything like that, like at the end of the day, if these people were after people for high crime rates, I don't think they would go after Muslims first. They would go after people from the Windrush generation, people like from like descendants of them, because like the highest crime rates in the UK on ethnic lines is from Black Caribbean, not from Muslims. That's just a fact. As far as the grooming gang 89 goes, well, I feel like it would behoove people to know that in terms of sexual abuse of children, 89% of offenders who are charged with that crime are white. Like, the idea that there was ever this overrepresentation of Asians in grooming of children has never actually been substantiated. The Home Office did a whole investigation on this in 2020, and they found out that that wasn't the case. They found out that I know you're shaking your head. You can tell me what you've seen that I haven't. But if you were going after terrorism, yeah, you'd probably go after like the Islamic population. But even then, they haven't seemed to have done like 7/7 and all that was quite a while ago. But and the broader Muslim community, every time this happens, is they come out and they condemn the shit out of it. So. Yeah, I feel like setting like people straight on these issues should also be like a top priority, because
I think it should be pointed out that the person who prosecuted this and actually essentially forced the government to deal with this was a Muslim man. I think his name was Afzal something, or maybe that was his surname. And look, when it comes to the grooming gang issue, I'm looking at specifically grooming gangs, and within the subset, within like there's pedophiles, and within pedophiles there's grooming gangs. So within that subset, if you compare the absolute percentage, yes, obviously, They're a small minority. But if you look at it as a proportion of the background population of, say, Pakistanis, then it's much higher.
That's what I'm going to ask you about, though, is because the Home Office investigated proportions as well. There were a small handful of studies from like 2011 that suggested a slight overrepresentation of Asians in grooming as groups, and sexual abuse of children as a group. But they also found that these studies were basically based on, they had masses of missing data. They called from like 40 police jurisdictions, and they ended up getting like less than half of them back. There's no proportionality sampling. We don't actually know what the demographics of each area these stats were coming from. That's
Because
what I mean. Even with group abuse, the idea of overrepresentation was never fully proven.
I've got the stats. From BBC News, I think it's quoting that report. It actually, which quote, a study available of data in 2020. It's stated that in 2015, the perpetrators of group and gang-based child sex exploitation were 42% white, 14% Asian or Asian British, and then 17% black. 14% Asian or Asian British is much higher than the actual percentage of Asians.
And what you would see if you, that was Berlowitz, right? That study, Berlowitz et al., 2015?
I believe so.
Yeah, and if you look deeper into that data, they will also say that because they only got data from like 19 out of 43 police forces,
no, wait, this is the Home Office report.
No, the Home Office report is discussing the 2015 study. The Home Office report is 2020.
Ah.
Yeah. So again, even if you look at those studies, like even the people who wrote that study, I imagine would admit, because the Home Office said this, is that the lack of weighting or the lack of representation or the lack of proportionality in even knowing which demographic areas these stats came from, this is not enough to conclude any kind of national average. Like the evidence for this has always been shaky at best. Now, it might be the case that there's a slight overrepresentation, but again, we're even talking about like a subset of a crime. As far as sexual abuse of children as a whole, this fact still stands that Asians are actually underrepresented. So yeah, that's what I mean. Is like,
I think
but if you
we
ask,
should
like,
make clear, do not demonize Muslims. Never, no one should demonize Muslims. No one should demonize Asian people. No one should demonize non-white people, ever. Because the very idea that somehow we're all carbon copies of each other is deeply racist. It's also stupid. Like, if you look at averages and you look at percentages and proportions, statistics, right? You can't look at a single data point, a single person, and then extrapolate based on an average. Because it's a single data point, it's a single person. So whenever it comes to real life, I always treat people as people, because everyone has their own mind. When it comes to studying this academically, looking at this, yes, I'll discuss it. But never will that bleed into the way I view people or the way in which I actually behave. I think that should be, and I think absolutely everyone should be the same. If anyone becomes bigoted or racist as a result of this, sorry, you're racist and bigoted, and there's no justification for it.
Okay, can I just say, I mean, this happens in rape prosecution kind of stats as well. We're not really talking about one data point or one crime, because what we find in those stats are the same people committing numerous crimes. So again, it's
the point I was making. I think you misunderstood somewhat.
Oh no, I wasn't responding to you. I was responding to the
I think it was basically, if you see an individual on the street, you can't judge them.
No. Absolutely not. Absolutely.
I want to talk about something Mark said earlier, and it's just a question that I have for the panel. He mentioned that this is one of the failures of multiculturalism. Do we think, at least in Britain, that multiculturalism has failed? Why or why not? Go ahead.
I would like to know why. In terms of opposing multiculturalism, and the parties that are most likely to do that, say Reform UK, well, they just ran an election in 2024, and they won 5 seats, 4 of which were in constituencies that are over 94% white, which is way above the national average of 82. Why is the anti-immigrant sentiment, and this is true of Europe as well, why is anti-immigrant sentiment the strongest in places that have no immigrants? It's kind of insane, isn't it?
It's because people if they're not interacting with someone else and they make judgments on them, they just see the negative stuff in the news, and unfortunately they
Well,
become
we also
bigoted and
need
racist.
within, it's not just the constituents, there are constituents within constituencies within those areas. Like in Hartlepool, there are different constituencies in there. And the one where the riots did break out was near the seafront area, which is more there's a part of Hartlepool, even though it's got a really bad rep now, that is very affluent. But there is also a part of Hartlepool that is, absolutely destitute. And this is where the asylum seekers are put. They're not put in the affluent areas, and it's that part of the constituency that that are raising the problem, that are voting for reform.
I think it's
Well,
important for us to kind of state that personally, I've actually supported asylum seeker applications. Every single one got accepted. So I'm not against asylum seeking, and nor am I against I don't have an anti-immigration immigrant sentiment.
But
I
these
do
are from
have concerns
constituencies that are
regarding it,
not
and I need
educated on this.
Yeah. But
I
what
think it
was the
goes deeper
question?
than that.
Sorry.
Oh, well, my question here is for multiculturalism, right? Mark mentioned earlier in one of his statements that this represents one of the failures of multiculturalism. And I am curious to see who here, if any of you, think multiculturalism has failed in Britain, to what extent it has failed in Britain, and if it has failed in Britain, why? And if not, why not? Why is it still a success? That's the discussion point that I'd like to get to for the tail end of this panel.
I think we've already touched on it. When you're talking about an overarching national identity and people invest themselves in that, it's just not there with multiculturalism in its current form. You've got disparate groups with no shared national identity, and it just causes issues. And we're told that we should just all get along, but you have to sort of invest yourself, because ultimately you're fighting human nature. I mean, it's difficult because the best way to sort of integrate is to live next door to somebody who is different than you, and you become friends, and then you realize that it humanizes that person. But if you dump a massive amount of people in a very short amount of time, that process, because it takes time and it sort of evolves over time, you just don't get that. And the issue, and to go to say what Lorna Box was talking about across Europe, is exactly that, is that the issue wouldn't exist if immigration was at manageable levels, and then you introduce people into communities in a managed way. You had systems in place to encourage people to integrate, and people, they make friends who look different than them, and then they realize, well, it just humanizes those people. And then if you want to increase immigration at that point, you probably could do so, but you still got to manage it. And we're just not doing that whatsoever. It is a massive experiment, and we are seeing the results. And we can talk about the civil unrest in the UK as we are doing now, but it's happened in Sweden, it's happened in France. It's just too many people in too little time, and it's an experiment.
It's not just with Islamic.
It might not even be too many.
Hold on, Paula. Go ahead, Paula.
Immigration.
Repeat that, Paula.
Oh,
we
sorry.
couldn't hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you asked the question before, how do we stop this? Okay. And just so speaking from my area of expertise, I think, well, for one, I think multiculturalism does work in certain areas that are affluent enough to deal with it. And it's clearly, but as for ideology, these days, our tribes are not based on communities anymore. We kind of live in what in evolutionary psychology we call ecological release. We don't have to kind of rely on our neighbor anymore to survive. And certainly in deprived areas, when what they would call foreigners coming in, they're certainly kind of estranged from each other, and everybody's getting benefits. So the tribes are more ideological but not geographical, and they don't speak to each other whatsoever about kind of common needs and common identity within that area. The way to, well, from me, and I know I'm not saying this is the only way to stop it, but one of the ways to stop it is to stop intersectionality in politics, because that is toxic.
Personally, I would like to
ahead.
point out that both David Cameron and Tony Blair have said the exact same thing. Multiculturalism has failed. They are two of the most liberal guys. Like, despite being a conservative, David Cameron was a very liberal prime minister, even though he was the architect of austerity. So economically he wasn't, but socially he was very liberal. This is
It's
the
really
issue.
ironic that Blair would say that, because he was the one who opened
That's the
borders.
thing. So after his premiership, Tony Blair, his job was representing the Middle East Peace Quartet. So Russia, China, EU, and America. And as part of that, he actually went on the ground and spoke to everyday kind of Muslims and Arabs. He immediately realized that actually there's a big problem. So initially, it wasn't the Tony Blair Institute that he set up. It was something about religion, right? It was like, that was the name. And he was focusing on all kinds of extremism with all kinds of religions, but especially within Islamist kind of radical Islam kind of sense. He's drastically changed, actually. That's why I like him so much. I'm a Labour Party member myself, by the way. I'm quite a Blairite.
I used to be.
I don't agree with everything he did. Sorry?
I used to be.
Yeah.
As soon
Well,
as he went down the
I'm from
identity politics route, I was out. That was it. I was like,
Yeah,
I can see
I'm from
problems
the
with this.
northeast. I'm from the northeast coalfield, and this is kind of the socialist heartland up here. So yeah, everybody up here is born to vote Labour, and yeah, I've been on a journey.
So I would point out that ghettoization is the issue. It's geographical distribution. And even actually the rate of immigration might actually be workable if there wasn't geographic kind of clustering. I live in essentially a Muslim ghetto in London, and most of the people here are Muslim. In my previous area, the school I went to was 80% Muslim, 80% South Asian, 10% black, and 10% other. And the other included white people. So no wonder I was radicalized. I knew very few kind of white people, and I hadn't kind of integrated well. I've noticed that Muslims and immigrants generally who live in kind of, when there's a good mix of people, right? Not just like mostly white people, but actually a good mix, say like 80% white, etc. They integrate so well. They become very liberal, they become very progressive, and they just integrate. And I think that one of the ways in which we can deal with this issue with kind of extremism and with lack of integration is if we actually use the Singapore model. So Singapore, what it did is that it looked at social housing and it said, okay, no one ethnicity is going to dominate any of the blocks. So they essentially designed it so that there was ethnic mixing, and that worked so well. They've very rarely ever had issues with kind of race riots or anything, and they are very ethnically diverse: Chinese, Indian, etc. Yeah.
Okay.
You would have to build housing to do that, though, wouldn't you? Really?
Which
is probably the problem, really. I mean, I didn't even consider it until now, but I was like, if you're not building housing for people are competing for less resources, which increases competition. And then when competition increases and you've got distrust and whatnot, it can be quite a potent mix, I imagine. And as we can see, it is.
I think a lot of people are just, that people are just being put in like multi-room houses that are Victorian houses that are falling apart, and
Abusive landlords, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, gang, this has been a robust discussion. I think we've kind of circled the drain a little bit. We've covered all the bases. And now I know a lot more about Britain than I did before, and I hope my audience does too. I don't know if we've solved any issues, but we've certainly discussed them. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and I'm going to give you a brief chance to shout yourselves out, tell people where they can find you. I have links to all these individuals in the YouTube description. Please check that out. If you've enjoyed this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, thank you all for coming. And when they tell you where they can find you, where you can find them, I should say, please go do so. Give them a follow, give them a sub, give them what they need. We're going to start with Mark, and we're going to end with Lonerbox. Mark, tell people closing thoughts, where they can find you. Go ahead.
I'd just like to thank everybody in the discussion this evening. I've enjoyed myself, and I apologise if I spoke over anybody. It can get quite heated. Obviously, not as heated as we've seen on the streets, but it's still. I apologise for that if that is the case. You can find me on X, Veteran Gamer UK, if you want to follow me. If you don't, no, it's your choice.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I'm not that interesting, to be honest.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your input. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate the invite. Thank you very much.
I follow you.
Sohail.
Yeah, thank you.
Ahmed.
I want to actually, one of my closing thoughts is that I really want to thank Lonerbox, because we needed an opposing view here, and he actually made very salient points, very, very salient points that many of us missed. So I especially want to thank him. Secondly, I want to say that we didn't actually discuss the solutions to this problem. And in fact, I'm very, very optimistic that essentially integration will happen, that Muslims will, my people will change, that change. I'm already seeing it on the ground. Reform is happening. And I'm very optimistic. I don't think that one should despair. I don't think one should certainly go out in the streets and riot. I don't think one should just go, oh yeah, we're fucked. Or just go, yeah, Britain's gone to the dogs. No, it hasn't. It's going to work. And I believe that. So that's what I want to leave with. My Twitter, my X handle is Sohail SN Ahmed. Actually, you might as well just want to look it up down in the YouTube description. Oh, thank you.
He's worth a follow, definitely.
Well,
Definitely worth a follow.
Well, what a little hug box here. No, thanks for coming. And yes, the description and the link is in my description, so please just click on that. I really appreciate your perspective and being here. I appreciate you bringing your expertise. Thank you very much. Paula Wright, please.
Okay, yeah, so I echo the thanks for everybody. It's good to discuss things and have robust exchanges of, opinion in a civilized manner, regardless of how robust they are. That it always should be allowed. So yeah, I'm at Sexy Isn't Sexist on X. That refers to an old essay of mine, which was kind of when feminists were trying to get rid of grid girls and the girls who make lots of money modeling, and just because radical feminists don't like women monetizing their youth and beauty. And I'm on Substack, Paula Wright at Substack. I have I write about evolutionary psychology, and my Substack's called Dismemics, which is about bad ideas that multiply furiously and destroy civilizations. I'm also starting a new stream on YouTube called Non-Feminist Majority. That's at I've written it down. NF Majority. I'm just starting that because, as I said, I do believe intersectionality, feminism is a fraud. It's not to help women. It's just basically to gain power over women and over men who are not feminists. So we should stop the stigma of criticizing feminism as being anti-woman, because it's not. And yeah, that's it.
Oh, thank you for being here. Check her out, gang. Her X handle is in my description. You could probably find all her other links. She'll probably post them out. So give her a follow there. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your perspective. Last but certainly not least, Lonerbox.
Yeah, I think people touched on the issue a little bit earlier. I think separation is a big problem. As far as the UK goes, I don't know. I feel there's a bit of a lack of national pride sometimes. Honestly, as far as attitudes towards immigration go across all of Europe, UK is still one of the most positive countries towards immigrants. Like when people say, "Oh, we're the most tolerant country," like we kind of are, despite the rioters. Like, yeah, they represent a minority, which is a really good thing. We do, like London, for example, has its problems, but compared to Paris, like what the fuck? Paris they just have a second circle outside the city and just throw all the migrants there, and no one cares about them. Like, so we do, yeah, we've definitely got things we should be proud of, even if there's room for improvements. No one said like it's an unprecedented thing. Like there are challenges. As far as where to go forward, yeah, I guess it's good to have common values. I think it's probably good that second generation, first generation migrants believe in things like democracy and equality and all that kind of shit. And I guess it would also be a good thing that locals are not so racist and stupid. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Where can people find you, Lonerbox?
YouTube, Lonerbox or Lonerbox Live.
Okay. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you all. And yeah, I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.